The prediction that came back to haunt Draymond. What if I told you that one of the loudest critics of the New York Knicks just made a prediction that shocked the entire NBA world? What if the same man who once laughed at Knicks fans, mocked their championship dreams, and predicted years of failure is now standing in front of millions of people saying New York might actually be the team to beat? Because that's exactly what happened. And if you're a Knicks fan, this story feels almost impossible to believe. 2 years ago, the New York Knicks were a punchline to many basketball analysts. They were viewed as a good story, a fun playoff team, but not a legitimate championship threat. No matter how many games they won, no matter how loud Madison Square Garden became, there were always critics waiting to remind everyone that the dream would eventually come crashing down. But one voice stood above the rest. Draymond Green, a four-time NBA champion, one of the smartest defensive minds the game has ever seen. A player who has spent more than a decade competing at the highest level imaginable. When Draymond talks basketball, people listen. And when he looked at the Knicks in 2024, he didn't see a future champion. He saw disaster. He saw a franchise headed toward disappointment. He saw a fan base that was getting its hopes up for nothing. Most importantly, he saw what he believed would become another painful chapter in New York basketball history. Then came the comment that Knicks fans would never forget. Not because it was critical, not because it was controversial, but because it felt personal. Draymond didn't simply question whether the Knicks could win a championship. He predicted misery. Years of it. The kind of statement that instantly gets screenshotted, clipped, reposted, and remembered forever. At the time, many people agreed with him. After all, the Knicks hadn't proven anything yet. Jalen Brunson was still fighting to earn respect as a true superstar. The roster still had question marks. And NBA history is filled with teams that looked promising for one season before disappearing into irrelevant. Maybe Draymond was right. Maybe New York was living on borrowed time. Maybe the dream was about to end. But here's where the story gets interesting. While Draymond was making predictions, the Knicks were making changes. While critics were talking, New York was building. While doubters were laughing, something dangerous was quietly taking shape behind the scene. And nobody, not even Draymond Green, could have predicted just how dramatically everything was about to change. Because the team he dismissed would soon become the team he couldn't stop talking about. The team he doubted would eventually force him to rethink everything. And before this story reaches its shocking conclusion, we'll uncover how one franchise turned criticism into fuel, how one superstar silenced an entire debate, and how Draymond Green found himself trapped by his own word. But first, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. And if you believe the Knicks have finally proven their championship material, comment 1. If you still think Draymond was right all along, comment 2. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications because the next chapter reveals the exact moment Draymond Green predicted the Knicks were headed for years of misery, and why that prediction is still haunting him today. The day Draymond declared the Knicks were doomed. Draymond Green did not whisper his doubt about the Knicks. He threw it into the NBA world like a match into gasoline. To him, New York was not a team on the rise. It was a team walking straight into disappointment with a fan base too excited to see the warning sign. After the Knicks made noise in the playoffs, the city started believing again. Madison Square Garden felt alive. Jalen Brunson looked like a star. The roster had toughness, chemistry, and identity. For the first time in years, Knicks fans had a reason to look at the future and feel something bigger than cautious hope. But Draymond saw something completely different. He looked at that excitement and called it dangerous. He compared the Knicks to teams that had one magical run and then disappeared. The 2021 Atlanta Hawks, the 2016 Portland Trail Blazers, teams that gave their fans one thrilling postseason before reality came crashing down. That comparison hit hard because it was not just basketball analysis. It sounded like a warning. Draymond was telling Knicks fans, "You think this is the beginning, but I think this is the peak." Then came the line that turned skepticism into a full-blown feud. Draymond suggested the Knicks were headed for years of misery and that everyone else would sit back and laugh at their delusions. For Knicks fans, that was the moment everything changed. They were no longer just defending a basketball team. They were defending their pride, their city, and years of pain that outsiders had turned into a joke. Every fan who had watched the Knicks struggle through bad seasons, failed rebuilds, and empty promises felt that comment like a personal shot. And the worst part was that Draymond had credibility. He was not some random analyst chasing clicks. He was a champion. He knew what real contenders looked like. So when he said the Knicks were not built for the mountain, people listened. But what Draymond did not realize was that his words became fuel. New York heard him, Brunson heard the noise, the fans saved every clip. And slowly, the Knicks began building the one thing that could answer him better than any argument ever could: a winning team. Brunson was never supposed to get this far. At the center of Draymond Green's entire argument was one question that refused to go away. Can Jalen Brunson really be the best player on a championship team? Not a great scorer, not a beloved leader, not an all-star, the best player, the engine, the closer, the man who carries an entire franchise when every defensive scheme is designed to stop him. Draymond's answer was no. His reasoning came from history. Brunson was not built like LeBron. He was not built like Durant. He was not a towering wing who could shoot over double teams or a freak athlete who could erase mistakes with size and explosion. Brunson was a smaller guard in a league where size usually wins in June. And Draymond knew that better than most people. He had spent years next to Stephen Curry, one of the rare smaller guards in NBA history who actually climbed the mountain as the central piece of a dynasty. But even Curry was treated as an exception, not the rule. That was Draymond's point. For a guard like Brunson, the margin for error is brutal. One bad matchup, one long defender, one elite playoff defense, and the entire offense can turn into a traffic jam. Draymond had seen it happen to brilliant guards before. Allen Iverson carried teams deep but never finished the job. Steve Nash changed basketball but never won a title. Damian Lillard built a legacy on impossible shots, yet never reached the finals as the #1 option. So when Draymond watched Brunson dominate the ball, he saw a familiar trap. A guard standing at the top of the floor, 5 defenders watching, the shot clock shrinking, every possession becoming harder than the last. But Brunson was never interested in fitting neatly into anyone's historical argument. He kept scoring, he kept leading, he kept walking into hostile arenas and playing like the pressure belonged to somebody else. Every 30-point night made the question louder. Every Knicks win made Draymond's old take more uncomfortable. And little by little, Brunson was forcing the NBA to ask a different question. What if history was not warning us about him? What if history was about to make room for him? The war between Draymond and Knicks fans, the battle between Draymond Green and Knicks fans did not stay on podcasts. It spilled into timelines, comment sections, debate shows, and every corner of NBA social media. New York fans are not quiet people. They do not forget disrespect. And when someone gives them a receipt, they keep it forever. So every time the Knicks won, the old clips came back. Draymond predicting misery. Draymond doubting Brunson. Draymond comparing the Knicks to teams that vanished after one playoff run. Draymond questioning whether the roster was serious enough to win big. Knicks fans posted everything. They turned his own words into weapons. And Draymond, being Draymond, did not back away. He fired back. He argued. He laughed. He acted like the noise did not bother him. But every response made the story bigger. That was the strange power of this feud. It was not just about basketball anymore, it became about respect. For Knicks fans, Draymond represented every outside voice that had laughed at their pain. Every analyst who treated New York as entertainment instead of a real basketball city. Every rival fan who used the past to dismiss the present. For Draymond, Knicks fans represented hype without proof, noise without a ring, celebration before the job was finished. Both sides believed they were right, and that made the conflict impossible to ignore. The more the Knicks won, the more pressure shifted back onto Draymond. He could not simply say they were lucky forever. At some point, winning stops looking like a hot streak and starts looking like identity. But Draymond still had one thing to hold on to: the playoffs. In his mind, regular season success meant nothing if a team could not survive when the game slowed down, the scouting got deeper, and every weakness was attacked over and over again. He was waiting for the Knicks to crack. Knicks fans were waiting for him to admit he was wrong. And as New York kept climbing, the entire NBA watched the war get louder, sharper, and more personal, because both sides knew the same truth. Only June could settle this. The trade everyone argued about. When the Knicks pushed their chips toward the center of the table, the NBA immediately split into 2 groups. One side saw ambition, the other side saw danger. New York added Mikal Bridges, a player built for playoff basketball. Long arms, defensive pride, corner threes, low maintenance offense. The kind of wing every contender wants when the game becomes physical and every possession matters. To Knicks fans, Bridges was more than a trade. He was proof that the front office believed Brunson's window was real. But Draymond Green was not sold. He looked at the cost, he looked at the expectations, he looked at a team that still had questions at the top of the roster, and he wondered if New York had just sacrificed too much for a player who might not change the championship map. That was the brutal part of building a contender. Every aggressive move can look genius if it works and reckless if it fails. Draymond saw the risk before he saw the reward. He believed the Knicks were loading up around a core that still had not proven it could win at the highest level. In his eyes, adding Bridges did not magically solve the Brunson question. It did not erase the concerns about size. It did not guarantee a title. And if it failed, the Knicks could be trapped. Too good to rebuild. Not good enough to win. That is the nightmare every franchise fears. But New York was no longer operating like a team afraid of criticism. They were operating like a team tired of waiting. They had Brunson in his prime. They had a culture. They had a city ready to explode behind them. and they knew opportunities in the NBA do not stay open forever. So the Knicks accepted the risk. They chose belief over caution, and that choice mattered because it sent a message to the locker room. The organization was not just hoping anymore, it was hunting. Still, Bridges alone was not the final piece of the puzzle. The Knicks needed something bigger, something that would change the entire structure of the team. And when Karl-Anthony Towns entered the picture, everything Draymond thought he understood about New York began to shift. The move that changed everything. Karl-Anthony Towns did not just give the Knicks another star. He gave them a different identity. Before Cat, the criticism was easy to understand. New York's offense often leaned too heavily on Jalen Brunson. When possessions broke down, Brunson had to create something out of nothing. When defenses tightened, Brunson had to take the hit. When the shot clock collapsed, Brunson had to save the possession. That style can win games. But in the playoffs, it can also become a prison. Draymond Green had built his entire critique around that weakness. He believed the Knicks were asking too much from a smaller guard. He believed elite defenses would load up, take away Brunson's comfort zones, and force New York into the exact kind of slow, painful offense that falls apart in June. Then KAT changed the geometry. Suddenly, the Knicks had a big man who could shoot, pass, and make decisions from the high post. Towns was no longer just a scoring option. He became a release valve, a connector, a second brain inside the offense. That changed Brunson's job. Instead of starting every possession against a loaded defense, Brunson could attack after the defense had already moved. He could come off actions, he could catch the ball closer to his spots, he could make one quick read instead of carrying 5 defenders on his back. That difference may sound small, but in playoff basketball, it is everything. 1 second of advantage can create a layup. 1 defensive rotation can create an open 3. 1 extra decision maker can turn a predictable offense into a living, breathing machine. And Draymond saw it. That was the fascinating part. He did not ignore the evolution. He recognized it with the eyes of someone who understands championship basketball. The Knicks were no longer just Brunson dribbling in front of the entire defense. They had layers now. They had counters, they had options, and when Towns also began defending at a level nobody expected, the whole equation changed. Suddenly, the weakness Draymond had circled in red was not so obvious anymore. The Knicks had evolved, and evolution is the one thing that can make even the smartest prediction look outdated. The playoff run nobody saw coming. The playoffs were supposed to expose the Knicks. Instead, the playoffs exposed the people who doubted them. Round after round, New York walked into pressure and looked comfortable. The games were physical, the possessions were tense, the margin between winning and losing was thin, but the Knicks did not look like a team waiting to collapse. They looked like a team built for the moment. Brunson was still the heartbeat, but he no longer looked alone. Bridges guarded, cut, spaced the floor, and gave New York the kind of two-way stability contenders need. Josh Hart brought energy that could flip a game without needing plays called for him. Mitchell Robinson gave the Knicks size around the rim. Towns provided scoring, passing, and a defensive presence that shocked even his biggest critics. And the wins kept coming. Not lucky wins, not chaotic wins, controlled wins. The kind that make opponents look uncomfortable and analysts start rewriting their notes. That was when the conversation around the Knicks began to change. At first, people said they were hot. Then they said the matchup was favorable. Then they said the East was weak. But after enough wins, excuses started running out. You can explain away 1 game, maybe 2, maybe even 1 series, but you cannot explain away a team that keeps beating everyone in front of it. And that was the problem Draymond Green now faced. His old take was built on the idea that New York would eventually be revealed as a temporary story. But every playoff win pushed them further away from that label. Every Brunson performance made the 1A debate harder to defend. Every defensive stand from Towns made the old concerns feel less current. Then came the number that changed the tone completely. 12 wins in 13 playoff games. That is not hype. That is not noise. That is not Madison Square Garden emotion, tricking people into believing. That is dominance. Even Draymond could not casually dismiss that. Because he had been part of a dynasty, he knew how rare that kind of postseason control was. He knew what serious basketball looked like, and whether he wanted to say it or not, the Knicks were starting to look serious. Very serious. Draymond's biggest admission: for 2 years, one word followed the Knicks everywhere: fluke. It was the word critics used when they did not want to believe. It was the word that turned every Knicks success into something temporary. It was the word Draymond Green had helped attach to New York's rise. A good story, but not sustainable. A fun team, but not elite. A playoff run, but not a real warning. Then Draymond said the words Knicks fans had been waiting to hear. That's no fluke. It was not a full apology. It was not emotional. It was not wrapped in softness. Draymond is never going to sit in front of a camera and beg a fan base for forgiveness. But for him, that admission mattered. Because Draymond does not hand out respect cheaply. especially not to a team he has spent years challenging. When he called the Knicks run legitimate, he was acknowledging that something real had happened. He was admitting that the evidence had become too strong to ignore, and he did not stop there. He praised the offensive changes. He explained how Towns operating away from the rim changed the entire matchup. He pointed out how Brunson was now receiving the ball in better spots. He talked about how the Knicks were no longer playing the same predictable style he once criticized, but the biggest surprise came on defense. Karl-Anthony Towns had long carried a reputation as a gifted offensive player with questions on the other end. Draymond had used that concern as one of his strongest arguments against the Knicks. If Brunson could be targeted and Towns could be attacked, how could New York survive against elite teams? Then the playoffs happened. Towns moved better. He communicated. He protected space. He played with force. He looked engaged in ways that changed how opponents attacked New York. And Draymond noticed. When one of the greatest defensive minds of his generation says a player is defending at a level he did not know was possible, that is not casual praise. That is a verdict. For Knicks fans, it was the sound of a critic running out of exits. Draymond could still argue. He could still poke the fan base. He could still remind everyone that nothing matters without the trophy. But the old version of his argument was gone. The Knicks had forced him to update the story, and now came the twist nobody saw coming. He was about to pick them. Why Draymond suddenly picked the Knicks? When Draymond Green finally chose the Knicks, it did not sound like a man chasing attention. It sounded like a man reading the chessboard. That is what made the moment so powerful. After years of doubt, criticism, and verbal battles with Knicks fans, Draymond did not simply say New York had a chance. He explained why their matchup against the San Antonio Spurs could tilt in their favor, and it started with experience. The Spurs were young, explosive, and terrifying because of Victor Wembanyama. A player like Wemby changes the rules of basketball. He blocks shots that should be safe. He catches passes that should be impossible. He forces teams to rethink everything they normally do near the rim. But the finals are not just about talent. They are about pressure. They are about late game decisions when every mistake feels enormous. They are about handling hostile arenas, media storms, physical fatigue, and the emotional weight of knowing a championship is right there. Draymond believed the Knicks had been through more. They had scars. And in the finals, scars can become strength. Then came the tactical part. If Wembanyama guarded Karl-Anthony Towns away from the basket, the Spurs risked pulling their best rim protector out of the paint. That opened space for cutters, curl actions, drives, and quick attacks from Brunson in the wings. If San Antonio kept Wemby near the rim, Towns could punish them from the perimeter or operate as a passer from the high post. Either way, the Knicks could force uncomfortable choices. That was the matchup problem Draymond saw. New York had size. Bridges, Hart, Towns, Robinson. They could not erase Wemby because nobody can. But they had enough length to bother passing lanes, contest lobs, and make San Antonio work for every advantage. More importantly, New York had an offense that no longer depended on one man solving everything. That was the final piece. The Knicks had answers. For years, Draymond questioned whether New York had enough answers. Against the Spurs, he believed they did. And that is why his prediction stunned everyone. The man who once mocked Knicks' belief was now standing in front of the NBA world and validating it. Not emotionally, not accidentally, strategically, the verdict. Nobody expected. In the end, the Draymond Green and New York Knicks story was never just about one prediction. It was about the difference between being doubted and being dismissed. Doubt can sharpen a team, dismissal can define it. Draymond did both. He questioned Brunson, he questioned the roster, he questioned the fan base, he questioned the trades. He questioned whether the Knicks had enough size, enough defense, enough offensive structure, enough championship DNA to survive the deepest waters of the playoffs. And for a long time, his questions were fair. Championship teams are not built on noise. They are built on proof. They are built through pain, adjustment, sacrifice, and the willingness to change before the league forces you to change. That is exactly what New York did. The Knicks did not win the argument by talking louder than Draymond. They won it by evolving. Brunson grew from star scorer into unquestioned leader. Towns became more than a talented offensive big man. He became a connector and a defender. Bridges gave the roster balance. The supporting cast accepted roles. The system became smarter. The team became harder to predict, harder to attack, and harder to dismiss. That is the real lesson. Great teams do not always prove critics wrong by becoming what critics expected. Sometimes they prove critics wrong by becoming something critics never imagined. Draymond was not entirely a hater. He was not entirely right either. He was a champion measuring the Knicks against the championship standard. But he also enjoyed the fight. He enjoyed poking New York, challenging the fans, and standing firm even when the evidence started moving against him. That made his final turn even more dramatic, because when Draymond Green finally picked the Knicks, it felt like the basketball world had reached a verdict. New York was no longer a cute story, no longer a fluke, no longer a temporary spark. They were real. And whether they finished the job or not, they had already done something powerful. They turned criticism into fuel. They turned pain into identity. They turned doubt into structure. They showed that growth matters more than noise, and that the strongest response to disrespect is not anger, it is improvement. So maybe the message goes beyond basketball. Do not let one loud voice define your future. Do not let old failures decide what you are allowed to become. Build, adjust, stay disciplined, and when the moment comes, let your work speak so loudly that even your biggest critics have no choice but to listen. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you believe Draymond was right to change his mind? Comment 1 if the Knicks are a real championship team. Comment 2 if you still think they have more to prove. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with another NBA fan, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next big NBA drama breakdown.